According to John Schellenberg, in his influential book, Divine Hiddenness and
Schellenberg. It's Schellenberg, which is a good Mennonite name. I'm guessing that if I was to play the Mennonite game, which is to go through the heritage and find the connections, that probably John and I are related, because, yeah, good Mennonite name, lots of Schellenbergs in my Mennonite community.
human reason, he contends that if an all-powerful God existed, then every reasonable, non-resistant person would come to believe.
That's actually a reasonable. I'm going to go with that. That's pretty good. That's a reasonable way to define it.
As you can see, he claims there are those who are non-resistant and don't believe because there hasn't been enough evidence to convince the non-resistant skeptic.
And that's the category I put myself in. I'm not resistant. I especially was even less resistant 5 years ago when I was leaving my faith. I was desperate to hold on to my faith and to keep it. So definitely not resistant then. I contend. I've searched my heart. I do all the things. I'm not resistant now, or at least I don't think so. But I think it's Alan. No, this isn't Alan Parr. I'm going to remember his name. Someone in the chat remind me this gentleman's name. I've forgotten. I knew it before. All right, carry on.
So according to Schellenberg, we've got a sender problem. Let's consider a syllogism of Schellenberg's argument as found in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Wow, well done. We're actually on one of these apologetics channels. We're actually going to go straight to the source, which is awesome, and put up a syllogism. I love it.
Premise 1. There are people who are capable of relating personally to God, but who, through no fault of their own, fail to believe.
Okay.
Premise 2. If there is a personal God who is unsurpassably great, then there are no such people. Conclusion. So there is no such.
Okay, I want to pause that before it goes off the screen. So Schellenberg has put forth in his career lots of different versions of the divine hiddenness argument. And this isn't the one that I'm most familiar with. I don't doubt that it is one that he's put forth at various times, much like William Lane Craig actually has several different flavors of the Kalam that he puts forth at different times. So it's not unusual that they have different wordings for different applications, shall we say. But I don't personally think that premise 2 adequately reflects my understanding of it, and definitely not my personal adherence to divine hiddenness. So if there's a personal God who's unsurpassingly great, then there wouldn't be any such people. Well, unsurpassingly great is incredibly vague and doesn't have any kind of indication as to why this greatness would require that humans know about him, other than, it doesn't seem to follow. I think the kind of divine hiddenness argument that I put forth, at least, that is compelling to me, is that if there is a divine being who wants to have a relationship with me, then there would be no non-resistant non-believers. There could be a deistic God that doesn't care about humans, doesn't care about Paulogia, and that's fine. The divine hiddenness argument doesn't speak about such a deity. It only speaks about a deity that wants to have a relationship, because presumably if it both wants to have a relationship with me and is also all-knowing and all-powerful, there's nothing stopping it from letting me know that it exists so that I can at least have intellectual assent. So if you want to have a relationship with someone, there's at least 2 phases for that. The first of which is an absolute prerequisite, and that is knowing that the other person exists. I cannot have a relationship with a person or any creature or any being if I don't know they exist. Doesn't matter my intentions otherwise. It doesn't matter how well we might connect. It doesn't matter whether I'm just being stubborn and a jerk. It doesn't matter. If I don't intellectually know that that person or creature or entity exists, the relationship can't happen. Prerequisite absolutely needs to happen. So any God that wants to have a relationship with you or with me or with anyone, there needs to at least be that first intellectual assent step. If this deistic God being wants to have a relationship with me, it can get me past that first hurdle. It can't necessarily get me past any other hurdles. If we're talking about a free will style relationship, with Christians like to talk about, or a place where I actually have a choice, but it's also not forcing me to have a relationship with it by letting me know that it exists. The Bible and history is replete with people who theoretically or supposedly had full evidence that God existed, be it the devil, be it Pharaoh, be it Adam and Eve, whomever. There seems to be a lot of people who had a lot of evidence that God exists, full knowledge that God exists, and were still able to reject him. So God is not forcing our hand by giving us this, at least revealing himself that he exists. So that's not something that anyone can force on us there. So anyway, I don't like this premise too. I don't like the way this is formulated. I would say substitute in instead, again, a God that wants that relationship with me. Because this surpassingly great. I can see how Christians can dance some kind of game where this greatness doesn't include wanting a relationship with me. So your mileage may vary, but I think that's a weaker version of this argument than what I would put forth.
God. How might we respond? Personally, I think the problem is with premise 1 through no fault.
Yeah, I should have known. The problem, I talked about my problems being with premise 2. No. He wants to go with problems or premise. Premise 1, people. It's definitely the people's fault that you're not accepting God. It's not God's fault. It's the people's fault.
Of their own. This is problematic and assumes too much. We can't assume the person who perceives himself as non-resistant is so entirely objective as to not be blinded by other things which might be blocking his ability to capture a clear peak of God as one who exists.
I mean, fair enough. I can't be certain that I am non-resistant. All I can do is evaluate myself. But the thing is, there is no one in the universe, until you've demonstrated God, there's no one in the universe who can better assess whether I'm resistant or non-resistant than me. Certainly you can't look at my life and tell me whether I'm non-resistant. No other human can read my mind, read my thoughts, know my motivations better than I can. You have to take my word for it. And this is why I don't think divine hiddenness is a good argument for other people. My divine hiddenness struggles shouldn't convince anyone else that God does or doesn't exist. But for me, it is sufficient and adequate that I can search my soul, the soul that doesn't really exist. I can search my thoughts. I can search my motivations. I can do that evaluation, which he's going to encourage me to do, frankly, and trying to identify these spots where supposedly I'm resisting. I'm resistant to this belief in God. No. And part of the weird way, like I can be very, very confident about this is because I did believe in God and my life was good and I didn't want to not believe. So this wasn't that I was this resistant non-believer. I became a non-believer because of a lack of evidence. Not all this motive ascribing that you talk about here. It falls apart. And I don't think Christians even properly understand divine hiddenness and why it's so strong for us, but let's carry on. He's going to impugn motive and tell me that I don't know my own thoughts, apparently. That's where we're heading, I'm sure.
Among the things blocking us can be presuppositions, unresolved traumas, disjointed rational conclusions, and all sorts of other influences.
All right, so yeah, you just have emotional scars or something. No, I don't have emotional scars from religion. Presuppositions, well, my presupposition used to be that God existed. I no longer have the presupposition in either case that God does or does not exist. I worked very hard to eliminate that presupposition. I do have presuppositions of an evidentialist that I want to apportion my belief to the evidence provided, but that seems entirely reasonable and doesn't rule out. A God can easily clear that hurdle. That's not a hurdle that prevents God from reaching me. Allegedly, Lee Strobel had that same bar and God cleared it for him. J. Warner Wallace had that bar, allegedly, cleared it for him. So that's not an unreasonable presupposition. You're just, and then he's just, and anything else that it's blocking you. So he's defining this into existence. If you don't believe in God, I'm defining your mental state as blocking it, whether you can identify it or not. Not helpful, and maybe is going to be assuring for your own congregation. Like, this is clearly not to help me, even though later you're going to try to address me. You are merely trying to make excuses for your own flock as to why what's obvious to you isn't obvious to everyone, I think. I wish that you were honestly trying to address a non-believer, but you're not.
there can be a combination of rational, relational, social, emotional, and volitional conditions that impair one's ability to be fruitfully objective.
What also could be said about every sentence he says, of course, is equally true of the Christian, right? There's all kinds of emotional and volitional and pragmatic reasons why you might want to believe in Christianity, and it is blocking you from noticing that there isn't sufficient evidence. If we're just psychoanalyzing people and prescribing motive, we can throw those. Every sentence can be thrown to either side of the fence. It doesn't really matter.
We cannot underestimate the...
And I was going to say, yes, absolutely. There can be emotional reasons why I'm not a believer. There absolutely can. And that is why I spend so much time checking myself, evaluating for myself whether any of those come into play. So it's good advice to try and check your biases, to try and identify your biases. And that's an ongoing process. It's not a one-time thing. I agree that that's a reasonable thing, but we can reach the conclusion that we're non-resistant.
effects of the fall and how it limits our capacity to remain free of bias.
Effects of the fall, of course, yeah, sin, which is yet, I guess, another problem that I've inherited. Let's say that I've done everything I can to be non-biased, but there's something hidden that's outside of my control, just a sin nature that prevents me from ever not being biased. Well, that's just on God then. Like then I was just destined for hell when I was born. So it almost doesn't matter whether I was honestly seeking or not. That's just a subconscious thing that I inherited. And if that's the case, nothing I can do about it. So I'm off to hell, something I didn't control.
No one is fully objective east of Eden. Besides this, I think those who claim that they are truly non-resistant need to be honest about themselves and ask, am I really non-resistant to Christianity? There are probably some features of...
That is the whole point. If you're not willing to do that self-searching thing, then divine hiddenness argument isn't for you. If you want to put forth the divine hiddenness argument against God, you do need to either put yourself forth. If you don't put yourself forth as a non-resistant non-believer, then you're at least putting forth that someone on earth at some point has been. I put forth that I am. And so, yeah, that's a good point. It is a prerequisite. We have to do that soul searching, but we can.
Christianity that don't sit well with such non-resistant people, which undoubtedly is skewing their sight.
So again, oh, well, you can't evaluate the evidence honestly because maybe there's some Christian stuff you don't like. Well, it's true. I used to be all in on Christianity and I was embraced all of it. There are things now that I look back on and say, well, maybe that's not so good, but it doesn't stop me from going back. There's nothing in Christianity that if I discovered that it was true, would make me want to spit in God's eye or anything. I would actually acknowledge and agree that he has the right, if he created it, to make rules and to use whatever system he wanted to do, whether or not that would be moral in the sense of the kind of secular morality that I now adhere to is one thing or another, but in God's morality, it would be fine. So, whatever. And the other thing, of course, would be there's certain aspects about Christianity that I think were problematic that I would then just try and resolve. And there's lots of Christians who have resolved certain things. But I think he's going to give us a list here. Let me just see if he gives a list of things.
Things like sin, hell, judgment, what the Bible has to say about sex. One way...
For some reason, it always ends on that one. I think that's like the big linchpin in it. I mean, it can be for people for sure. It's not the be-all, end-all that they want to make it out to be. Anyway, so hell, judgment, whatever. Let's just take hell. If I was to become a Christian again, I'm not sure I would be able to leap on board that the vision of hell that I used to have was moral in a way that I could reconcile. But that's okay, because there's a lot of Christians who agree that the kind of version of hell that evangelicals put forth isn't necessarily moral and isn't even necessarily... So therefore, they've interpreted Christianity differently to eliminate hell. There are annihilationists. There are universalists. There are people who put forth not eternal conscious torment, but like a period of conscious torment in proportion to our sins. And even some people some Christians put forth that maybe hell has levels in a way that perhaps Hitler will have a worse time in hell than someone who their biggest problem was that they didn't have didn't fully mentally assent to the conditions for salvation, that's not preventing me from becoming a Christian again, because I see other Christians who have had these same problems with Christianity and just adapted their version of Christianity to accommodate that. And I'm sure that's what I would do as well, if only God would show me that he existed. And then I could have these conversations with him.
Getting at the so-called non-resistant person's resistance might be to ask.
So you're just denying the category. You are saying every non-resistant person has resistance. So just say it. You don't think that there are non-resistant people. Fine. But you can't do this dance that everyone who's non-resistant is secretly so. That's just, again, not helpful to anyone other than your own flock who see the big problems here.
Something like, so tell me, why don't you believe in Christianity?
I have a whole video. I'm laughing. Whole video, like that's a unit of measurement. I was teasing the TikTokers earlier. I've done several videos why I'm not a Christian. I talk about it all the time. It has to do with a lack of evidence. So what are you going to do with that?
At that point, we might get a brief download on some of their objections. And guess what? On hearing these, we will have entered the detection zone.
I would love for you to enter the detection zone with me. Where is my resistance in my evaluation of the evidence?
As those objections have just revealed where their resistance lies.
So again, you're just denying that there can be definitionally, there can't be resistant, non-resistant people. So either there are non-resistant people or they're not. It seems like you're just wanting to not go as far as say that, but you're, categorically saying we don't exist.
As I conclude, here is some advice I'd like to offer to the person who thinks they are non-resistant and yet wants to encounter God.
Excellent. This is for me. This is advice for me, because that's exactly describes me. I think I am non-resistant. And if God is real in whatever version of him, be it Christian or something else, I definitely want to know. And will immediately be on board with it. So what's the advice for me?
First, don't underestimate our ability to be skewed about our own biases.
I don't, because I lived my whole Christian life. I came out of that definitely recognizing what strong biases I had towards Christianity and how this whole facade and infrastructure and worldview that I needed to construct that kept me there. And it was in my commitment to being systematic in removing those biases that I landed where I am. So I definitely, trust me, I'm a good reminder, we can all be biased and got to point that out, but I'm fully aware of the consequences of biased thinking.
Second, ask yourself what you are looking for. Are you being realistic, like expecting God to do something for you that he doesn't do for others who believe?
Doesn't do that for others who believe. Let me ask you this. Who's being unrealistic? I am asking that the evidence for God be proportional to the claim. I am not currently accepting, I don't see sufficient evidence to grant even like the supernatural exists, all these kind of things, but all those things are easily overcome by sufficient evidence. And so why am I being unreasonable in wanting sufficient evidence? And why is it unrealistic because God hasn't provided to other people? Why is the question not, why is everyone so credulous that they're accepting God with improper evidence? Should I not be outraged? Why aren't all the rest of you demanding more? Is the flip to that question. And it's not arrogance to say that I want God to treat me differently than everyone. I want God to give everyone, if he exists, I want him to give everyone that first step, that intellectual assent. We can just know for sure, we can have fully informed decision-making on whether we want to follow God. At this point, I cannot make an informed decision. I'm not looking for something special. I want all of us to be treated with the respect to at least get us there.
Have you set the bar so high so as to ensure that you'll always have a finger to point at the sender?
Have you set the bar so low that you value credulity, that being credulous is what you're advocating? that it's like, you know what, this is the amount of evidence that God's willing to put forth, take it or leave it. And the only people who can be saved then are those that just arbitrarily find it convincing. That's awful.
Third, do you think it's realistic for you to be able to set the terms for how God should make himself known to you?
No, that's not what I'm putting forth. If God, in fact, made me, then God made me in such a way, even with the fall and with all the possible things, he created my brain such that it can only be convinced by certain things. And if God is real, he can absolutely overcome those things. I'm not telling him how to do those things. I'm not setting the conditions that it's got to be X, Y, or Z. I often say that I'm not sure what would convince me, but God absolutely knows. And God can choose to do that anytime he wants, if he wants to have a relationship with me. I am not demanding of God that he do a certain thing other than to meet the minimum level of proof that is reasonable to accept that he exists. And if he's not willing to meet that, there's literally nothing I can do other than just be credulous. It's just definitionally, it means I'm just taking it with insufficient evidence. So does God want to, if God needs me to accept on insufficient evidence, then I'm just screwed. Sorry. Bad luck to me that I was made that way. Sucks.
Fourth, ask yourself, what are your objections to Christianity? As mentioned, it's there you might detect where your resistance has escaped you.
Again, I will just say that accepting that God exists has nothing to do with my resistance to Christianity because I'm not there yet. So I could accept that a God exists and reject Christianity, for example. I could, and lots of people have followed that path. They fully believe in a creator God. They feel like they've had experiences and there's enough evidence to tell them a creator God, but for them, there's sufficient evidence of Christianity. So that is an option open to me, even if I thought Christianity was just stupid on its face and hated it for irrational reasons. I could absolutely still accept that a God exists. So this fourth objection, kind of irrelevant, but shows the Christocentric thinking that's going on here, that you're conflating our brand of religion with accepting that there's a God.
Fifth, don't quit seeking. Humbly ask God to help you, even with your unbelief.
Definitely do that on a regular basis. I absolutely am open to this. I'm on record as being open to this. I'm still seeking. Absolutely. I do far more research into what a theist's viewpoint is and what they have to say than anyone who doesn't believe. I spend very little time in the echo chamber of the disbelief, and most of my time absolutely investigating all the new claims that come forth. So I think I got this one.
Finally, I'd say, while you may not have the experiential sense of contact that you'd like, don't underestimate the evidence Christianity has on offer.
It is because of the lack of evidence that I am not a Christian and not because of the experiential things. I definitely experienced what I thought was Christian love and acceptance and the same emotions that I hear current Christians talk about. I experienced all those. I definitely had those experiences. I just think they're misattributing them, and the evidence is what tells me that they're misattributing them. So this is a weird way to put the cart before the horse.
Just because God's presence isn't obvious doesn't mean his presence is non-existent.
I would agree with that. A lack of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. There you go. Definitely God could exist, even though I don't see enough evidence for him. But if that God wants me to have, we're just talking about whether a God who wants me to have a relationship with him exists, not whether there's a generic one.
The gospel is a powerful case for God's love, demonstrating the distance he came in the incarnation to reconcile us to God. The evidence of his death and resurrection can't be ignored.
Yeah. So I have made hundreds of videos at this point regarding that particular topic, and I am not ignoring the evidence for resurrection. I am fully aware and paying full attention about the evidence of resurrection, and it's terrible.
The arguments against the resurrection are so weak that one is more rational to believe in the evidence for the resurrection than to believe in the evidence against it.
So I guess we're just name calling at this point. I just said that the evidence for the resurrection is terrible. You're saying the evidence against the resurrection is so weak. So this goes back to the same point. So we're coming at this from very different worldviews. Your worldview that you happen to hold is the lucky one that is credulous enough to have a low enough bar about God that you get to be saved. I am in the unlucky position that I, through no fault of my own, am not convinced by the evidence for God. I am more skeptical. Even when I try to be more credulous about it, it still comes up short, and I'm just screwed. So again, my only conclusion can be that there isn't a God who wants to have a relationship with me. There might be a God, but he doesn't want to have a relationship with me. So I am living my life exactly as I should in that scenario.
All that to say, it may mean trusting in the evidence of the resurrection and following him, even if it means you are apparently bereft of the kind of experiential contact with God you were in search of.
Nope, I wasn't in search of experiential. You are just describing motive again. It's absolutely the evidence that caused the problems, and with the experiential, not the other way around. Sorry, try again.
In time, through faith and obedience, I believe if you truly seek him, you shall find him.
There is your tautology again. So everyone who truly seeks him finds him. And so if you don't find him, you're not truly seeking him. Isn't that convenient?
Again, no receiver will be without excuse.
We ended it on a threat. No receiver goes unworded. So, sorry, no receiver is without excuse. So he's just telling me it's on me. If there was insufficient evidence and I didn't just accept and I wasn't credulous, you're burning in hell, buddy. And that's on you.